It's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I was explaining why your critically ill loved one might need dialysis or hemofiltration for kidney failure. And this week is basically the second part of that question, and this week I want to dive into how long your critically ill loved one can stay on a dialysis machine, and also what's happening if your loved one needs dialysis outside of intensive care. Now, if you have read or watched last week's Your Questions Answered episode, by now you have a good understanding why your critically ill loved one has gone into kidney failure and why he or she needs hemodialysis or the kidney machine in intensive care. If you haven't watched or read last week's episode, you can click here on the blog to read or watch last week's episode. Hopefully this is only going to be a short-term measure to get your loved one's kidneys going again, and hopefully the dialysis machine is going to be effective and your loved one's kidney started working again. As I explained last week, most critically ill patients in intensive care that go into kidney failure and require the dialysis machine only require the kidney machine temporarily until the kidneys have recovered and started working again. But just like with anything else in intensive care, there may be the situation where the kidneys don't recover, or the recovery process takes a lot longer than the intensive care team and you would have initially expected. If that's the case, there are a number of things that may have led to this, including, and not limited to, your critically ill loved one's kidneys are taking a lot longer to recover. This can often be the case in multi-organ failure, where a number of organs, including the heart, the lungs and the liver, fail as well. Or your critically ill loved one's kidneys have been irreversibly damaged and therefore require ongoing hemodialysis. In both cases, your critically ill loved one is dependent on the dialysis machine. And if your loved one is in multi-organ failure, generally the kidneys can be controlled well with dialysis and hemofiltration, whereas the other organs such as the heart, lungs and liver are much more difficult to control. If your critically ill loved one's kidneys have been irreversibly damaged, like in chronic kidney failure, the most common reasons for that are diabetes, high blood pressure or hypertension, glomerulonephritis, which is an inflammation of the filtering system of the kidneys, polycystic kidney disease, which is basically the formation of cysts in the kidneys, or anemia, which is a deficiency in the number or quality of red blood cells. Or it could be caused by overuse of drugs such as aspirin, ibuprofen and paracetamol. Or it could be caused by some infectious diseases. In essence, if your loved one's kidneys have been irreversibly damaged, the process in intensive care is to stay on the dialysis machine in order to achieve the following goals: maintaining a good and healthy fluid balance so that urine output can be replaced through the dialysis machine, and effective clearance of the kidney markers such as urea and creatinine, and therefore minimize toxins in the blood. In theory, a patient can stay on the kidney or dialysis machine forever, and there are no limitations. However, there will be a point where your loved one is ready to leave intensive care, irrespective of the irreversible kidney damage and irrespective of the need to require ongoing dialysis. In essence, if your loved one's kidneys have been irreversibly damaged, there is no reason to stay in intensive care if your loved one is ready to leave intensive care. Once your loved one has reached that point, dialysis and the replacement of the kidney function is taken over outside of intensive care, and hemodialysis is generally required 3 times a week for a few hours a day. That can either be done in hospital, in specialized dialysis centers, or even at home with professional help, or even independently. The good news is that there is usually help from specialized services available, or training if your loved one can do it him or herself. I hope that this episode has helped you to understand how long your loved one can stay on the dialysis machine, and it also helps you to determine and understand the next steps outside of intensive care. If you have a question that you want to have answered, please send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com and I'll answer your question within 24 hours. If your loved one is still in intensive care and you feel powerless, helpless, out of control, and if you feel like you can't make an impact, you can get more information and more in-depth insight that you must know once your loved one is critically ill in intensive care by downloading your free Instant Impact Report now. In the free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In the free report, you'll also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle, and vulnerability. 5 killer tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to control, power, and influence in your situation. You'll get behind the scenes insight so that you understand what's really happening. How you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. With your free Instant Impact Report, you'll also get 4 other free reports, and the reports you will be receiving are the 6 questions you need to ask the most senior doctor in intensive care, 10 things you didn't know doctors and nurses are talking about while you're not at the bedside with your loved one, the 7 answers to the 7 most frequently asked questions if your loved one is critically ill in intensive care, 9 myths of being a critically ill patient in intensive care. So download your free reports by entering your email below. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week with another update.